Part 1. She stood at the back of the crowded music hall, trying to make herself look smaller than she already was. Her clothes were plain, simple, and worn from years of hand-me gowns, and she kept pulling at her sleeves as if they would somehow help her blend into the shadows. She had come here with a tiny hope, the kind of hope she never dared to say out loud. She only wanted one chance to touch the grand piano on the stage. She didn't come for attention. She didn't come to impress anyone. She just came because music was the only thing that made her world feel full. But as she stood there, clutching her small backpack, she could already feel eyes sliding toward her, judging her without even speaking. The hall was filled with students from wealthy families, all dressed neatly, all talking proudly about their lessons and teachers and private tutors. She didn't have any of that. Everything she learned on a small, second-hand keyboard that only worked when she pressed the wire a certain way. She tried not to look nervous. She tried not to stare at the grand piano on stage, polished so bright that the lights above glowed on its surface like stars. She had never touched such an instrument. She had only seen them on screens. The workshop was hosted by a world-famous pianist, someone considered a legend among music students. People spoke about him with awe, his talent, his career, his fame, his confidence. She had watched his performances online, admiring his skill, dreaming that maybe if she ever became good enough, she might one day play one of the pieces he performed. But now he was here, standing on the stage, greeting the audience with his perfect smile and his confident voice. Everyone clapped loudly. She didn't clap as fast as the others. She just looked at him and wondered if someone like him could ever understand someone like her. The pianist began speaking about dedication, about practice, about discipline. His voice echoed through the hall, smooth and proud. Everyone listened closely, nodding like they understood every word. She listened too, but more quietly, letting each word sink into her mind. Maybe she didn't have teachers or expensive lessons, but she knew what dedication meant. She knew what discipline meant. She practiced every night until she couldn't keep her eyes open. She practiced even when she was tired, even when the little keyboard acted up and skipped notes. Her heart sped up when the pianist mentioned that there would be a small demonstration later, a moment for students to try playing a short piece on stage. Her fingers tingled just thinking about it. She didn't know if she had the courage to go up there, but she wanted to. She wanted it more than anything. But every time she imagined walking toward the stage, she also imagined everyone staring at her, wondering who she was, wondering why someone like her dared to step forward. She told herself not to think about that. She told herself this was her chance. As the workshop continued, she shifted from one foot to the other, trying to stay calm. She listened to students brag about their competitions and performances. She listened to parents whisper about future auditions, academies, scholarships. She didn't have any of those stories. She only had her dream and her quiet talent she kept hidden from the world. When the moment for the demonstration finally arrived, a few students rushed forward immediately. They were confident, smiling, eager to show what they could do. The pianist welcomed them with a charming grin, praising their courage. One by one, they sat at the piano and played simple pieces. The crowd clapped politely each time. The pianist complimented them in his own stylish way, even though some of the pieces were shaky and a few notes were missed. Nobody minded. These students belonged here. They were expected to be here. She watched from the back, holding her breath each time another student walked up. Her heart kept whispering, "Go. You came all this way. Just try." But her feet wouldn't move. She felt glued to the floor, stuck between hope and fear. Then, when the last student finished, the pianist looked over the hall and asked if anyone else wanted to try. His voice rang out confidently, almost teasingly. Her heart jumped. This was her moment. If she didn't step forward now, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She took a small breath, another, and then she stepped out of the shadows. She walked down the aisle slowly, her steps hesitant but determined. Some people noticed her and whispered. A few raised their eyebrows. They didn't recognize her from any academy or music school. She could hear a couple of soft chuckles, the kind that people make when they're surprised in an unkind way. She kept walking. When she reached the edge of the stage, the pianist looked down at her. His expression changed instantly. Surprise first, then something sharper, something she couldn't name. His smile tightened. He glanced at her clothes, at her worn bag, and then back at her face. There was a small laugh from somewhere in the crowd. She didn't know if it was about her or something else, but it didn't matter. She felt it. The air shifted. People were judging her, even without saying a word. The pianist leaned closer to his microphone and said, in a polite but pointed voice, "You want to try?" The way he said, it made it sound like a joke. She nodded quietly. He gave a small laugh, short and sharp, and some of the audience laughed lightly with him. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to sting, enough to squeeze her heart. She stood still, trying not to show the hurt. She didn't come here for laughter. She didn't come here for approval. She only came because she loved music, and she wanted one chance to show it. The pianist shrugged, still smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "All right," he said. "Let's see what you can do." His tone made it clear he didn't expect much. Maybe he thought she would sit down and freeze. Maybe he thought she didn't know anything at all. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The wooden floor creaked softly under her shoes. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her as she walked toward the piano. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to keep going. When she reached the bench, she ran her hand gently along the polished wood. It felt unreal. She sat down slowly, adjusting her position like she had practiced so many times at home. Behind her, she could hear whispers. Someone muttered that this would be interesting. Another whispered that she looked nervous already. A few giggled. She didn't look at them. She didn't look at the pianist. She kept her eyes on the keys. She placed her fingers on the piano, and for a moment, the whole hall seemed to hold its breath. The pianist crossed his arms, ready to watch her fail. Some people leaned forward, expecting something awkward or clumsy. Her heart pounded hard against her chest. She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting the noise fade away. She thought about her tiny keyboard at home, about the nights she spent practicing when everyone else slept, about the music that lived in her like a quiet flame. She told herself, just play. Forget everything else. Just play. And then she pressed the first key dot. It was soft, gentle, but steady. The sound echoed through the hall, clearer and more beautiful than any note she had ever played before. And in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. This was it, her chance, not her moment. And no amount of laughter or doubt could take it away. Part 2. For a moment, the hall stayed quiet after she played that first soft note. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was simply her way of breathing through her fear. She kept her fingers resting lightly on the keys, waiting for her heart to calm before she continued. The whispers behind her died down slowly, replaced by a strange kind of silence. The pianist, standing a few steps away, raised an eyebrow. He clearly expected her to stumble. He thought the first note might be luck, or maybe she would freeze any second. She could feel his doubt pressing down on her, like weight on her shoulders. But she didn't look at him. She couldn't. She focused on the piano in front of her, on the keys she had dreamed of playing for years. She took a small breath and let her fingers move again. This time, 2 notes followed, then 3, forming the beginning of the piece she had practiced night after night on her small, stubborn keyboard at home. The sound that came from this grand piano was different, fuller, richer, clearer. It felt like the music was waking up inside her. The audience leaned in slightly, unsure of what they were hearing. Some expected her to stop at any moment. Some waited for a mistake so they could whisper again. But she didn't stop. Her hands moved with slow confidence, finding each note as if she had grown up playing on this very piano. She kept her eyes mostly on her hands, but her mind drifted to memories of her late-night practice sessions. She remembered sitting on the floor with her keyboard on an old table, trying not to wake anyone as she tapped each key softly. She remembered the frustration she felt when the sound glitched or when a note didn't play at all, but she kept going anyway. She didn't have perfect tools, but she had a heart that refused to give up. No. Sitting at the grand piano, she felt all those nights gathering behind her. Pushing her forward dot as she moved further into the piece, the music grew a little more complex. A few people in the crowd sat up straighter. Someone whispered, "Wait. She actually knows what she's doing." Another person mumbled, "This sounds good." The soft surprise in their voices drifted to the stage. The pianist crossed his arms tighter, his smile fading into a stiff line. He wasn't expecting this. He had invited her up almost as a joke, assuming she would get nervous and hit random notes. But now he was watching her closely, his eyes narrowing in confusion. The girl didn't notice his reaction. She was lost in the music, not in a dramatic way, but in the simple, honest way someone feels when doing the one thing they truly love. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about proving anything. It was just her and the piano dot. Her fingers began to move a little faster, flowing through the melody with a softness that came from years of gentle practice. The crowd no longer looked at her clothes or her simple appearance. They were watching her hands now. They were listening to the sound she was creating. And for the first time since she walked into the hall, she didn't feel small. She felt like she belonged, but not everyone accepted that so easily. At the back of the hall, one student whispered to another, "Maybe she memorized something easy." Another replied, "She'll mess up soon." They were used to being the best in the room. It bothered them to see someone they had judged playing with this kind of calm control. The pianist finally stepped closer to her. He tilted his head, listening with a puzzled expression. She could sense him approaching, but she didn't let it distract her. She kept her eyes on the keys, her breath steady. Then came the part of the piece she always feared, a small jump across the keys, something that required precision and timing. On her keyboard at home, this part was almost impossible because some keys didn't respond well. She always had to adjust. But here, everything felt right beneath her fingertips. The piano supported her. The keys reacted instantly. She made the jump perfectly. A few people in the audience gasped softly. Even the pianist blinked, surprised. She kept going, her confidence building with each note. The room was no longer filled with judgment or muffled giggles. Now it was filled with something else, curiosity, attention, a slow, growing respect that she wasn't wearing fancy clothes. She wasn't from a famous academy, but she was playing with more heart than half the students in the room. Everyone could feel it. Halfway through the piece, the pianist couldn't hide his surprise anymore. He leaned forward slightly, studying her technique. Her posture wasn't perfect. She had learned everything on her own, but her touch, her timing, her feeling, it was all there. It was raw but real. The girl heard the shift in the room. The silence no longer felt heavy or cold. It felt warm now, like the audience was leaning in, carried by the sound she was creating. It made her brave. Her hands relaxed even more, her movements smoothing out. She played the next set of notes with gentle confidence, letting the music speak for her. And it did. The whispers had changed. No one was laughing now. No one was mocking her or waiting for her to fail. The room that had once felt like a mountain pressing down on her now felt open, like a quiet space where she could exist without fear. Still, there were a few eyes watching her with disbelief. Some students crossed their arms tightly. Others frowned, unable to accept that a girl they didn't know, someone who didn't look like she belonged there, was doing something they couldn't. The pianist straightened up, clearing his throat. He didn't say anything, but the girl could feel his attention sharpening. She sensed him realizing she wasn't just another student. She had something he didn't expect. She continued, reaching the softer part of the piece, where each note had to be played with care. Her fingers danced lightly, barely touching the keys. The hall felt so quiet, she could almost hear her own breathing. For the first time since entering the workshop, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't thinking of anyone's judgment. She wasn't thinking of her old keyboard or her long nights of practice. She was simply here, letting the music flow through her. The audience watched her, some in awe, some in confusion, some in disbelief. But they watched. Near the end of the piece, she slowed down naturally, letting the melody fade gently. Her hands trembled a little, but only because she was putting everything she had into the final notes. She didn't rush. She didn't force anything. She let the music end the way it was meant to end, peacefully, honestly. As she pressed the final note, the sound echoed beautifully in the hall. It lingered for a heartbeat before dissolving into silence. The silence that followed wasn't the same silence she heard before. It wasn't the silence of judgment or doubt. This was a silence of stunned realization. A breath, held by hundreds of people who had expected to laugh, but instead found themselves unable to look away. The girl lifted her fingers slowly from the keys. She didn't stand yet. She didn't know what to expect. Her heart hammered inside her chest, loud and fast. She thought maybe the crowd would still laugh. Maybe they would say it was just luck. But no one moved. No one spoke. They were too shocked to react. Even the pianist stared at her with an expression she had never seen before, a mix of confusion, surprise, and something close to discomfort. She looked down at her hands, her breath shaky but steady. She had done it. She had played. She had given everything she had, and for the first time in her life, she felt the quiet power of her own courage. She didn't know it yet, not fully, but she had just changed something in that room. Something big, something none of them were expecting. She woke up the next morning with a strange mixture of nerves and excitements swirling inside her chest. The events of the previous day kept replaying in her mind. The pianist's dismissive words, the audience's reaction, the unexpected moment when she had dared to sit in front of a piano again, despite everything. But what stayed with her most was the quiet support she had received from people she had never even seen before. Their kindness had touched her so deeply that it gave her a kind of soft strength she didn't know she still had as she stepped out of her small room. The morning air felt sharp and cool on her face. She wrapped her arms around herself and took a deep breath. Today, she told herself, was not about proving anything to that famous pianist or the people who had laughed. Today was about proving something to herself. She wanted to know if she still had the courage to keep going. The street outside was slowly waking up. Shops opened their shutters. Bakery doors let out warm smells of fresh bread, and the city hummed with life. She walked slowly, taking everything in, letting her steps calm her breath. She had no clear plan for the day, but her heart guided her back toward the music hall where everything had happened. When she arrived, the place was quiet. The big doors were closed, and the echo of yesterday's noise felt like a distant memory. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking at the building. She remembered how small she had felt walking inside for the first time, how nervous her hands had been, how loudly her heartbeat had pounded. But she also remembered how, once she started playing, everything else had disappeared. Her hands had remembered the keys better than she had expected. Her heart had remembered how to breathe Dot as she stared at the hall. She wondered if she should turn back. But something pushed her forward instead. She moved to the side of the building and found a bench. Sitting there, she let her eyes wander across the empty courtyard. After a while, she heard footsteps. She looked up and saw the same organizer from yesterday approaching. The woman seemed surprised to see her, but not upset. Instead, she gave a warm smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. "You came back," the woman said gently. She nodded shyly. "I just wanted to sit here for a bit. I'm not trying to cause trouble." "There's no trouble," the woman replied. "Actually, I'm glad you're here." She blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected that the woman sat beside her. For a moment, they watched the empty space in silence. "What happened yesterday?" the woman continued softly. "Wasn't fair to you. I know how hard it must have been to stand in front of people who didn't believe in you." She lowered her eyes, feeling her chest tighten. "I didn't expect them to laugh." "I know," the woman whispered. "And you didn't deserve that. But you did something very brave. You played anyway. Most people would have walked off." That made her heart feel warm again. She didn't quite know how to respond, so she simply nodded Dot, and the woman surprised her again. She stood up and said, "Come with me." The girl hesitated, but rose to her feet. The woman led her to a small side door of the music hall. She unlocked it and stepped inside. The hallway was empty, quiet, with soft echoes bouncing off the walls. She followed slowly, her steps careful. The woman pushed open another door. Inside was a practice room, not very big, not very fancy, but warm and filled with soft golden light. In the middle was a piano. Her breath caught. "I thought you might want to practice in peace," the woman said. "No audience, no pressure. Just you and the keys." She didn't realize she was holding her breath until it escaped her in a shaky sigh. She stared at the piano like it was an old friend she had lost long ago. "Can I really play here?" she whispered. "Of course," the woman smiled. "Take all the time you need." Before she left the room, she turned and added, "And don't worry. No one will disturb you. This room is yours for today." When the door closed behind her, the room fell into a deep, peaceful silence. She took slow steps toward the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. She felt nervous, but not the same kind of nervousness that had filled her yesterday. This was a softer feeling, a hopeful one. She finally pressed a key. The gentle sound filled the room. Then she pressed another and another. Her hands slowly remembered the shape of the music she had learned years ago. She began playing the piece she had practiced in secret for so long. It wasn't perfect at first. Her fingers slipped, and her timing was a little shaky. But she kept going. She kept trying. As the minutes passed, her body relaxed. Her shoulders softened. The music grew steadier. Her hands found their rhythm. Soon she wasn't thinking at all. The music flowed from her naturally, as if it belonged to her, as if it had been waiting for her to return. She played through the morning. She played through the early afternoon. She stopped only to rest her hands or sip water from the small bottle she had brought. But each time she returned to the piano, she felt stronger, more sure, more herself. At one point, she realized she was smiling. That surprised her more than anything else. By mid-afternoon, she felt a deep sense of calm fill her chest. It was the kind of calm she had not felt in a very long time. She leaned back from the piano and let her fingers rest in her lap. For the first time since she had walked into this city, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Then she heard a soft knock on the door. She startled slightly. The woman from earlier peeked in. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to check on you." The girl smiled shyly. "I'm okay. Thank you for letting me play." The woman stepped inside and listened as the girl played a few more gentle notes. "You know," the woman said thoughtfully, "there's something special in the way you play. You don't force the music. You feel it. People can hear that." The girl looked down, embarrassed. "I just play how I feel. That's all." "And that," the woman replied warmly, "is exactly why people should hear you." The girl glanced up with wide eyes. "People?" The woman nodded slowly. "There's a small gathering happening tomorrow. Nothing big, just a simple community event. I think you should play there." Her heart thumped hard. "Me? I don't know if I can." "You can," the woman said in a steady, comforting voice. "Yesterday showed me that you're braver than you think. And today showed me how much heart you put into your music." The girl hesitated. She remembered the laughter, the sting of it, the fear that had wrapped around her, but she also remembered how it had felt to push through. "I don't want people to laugh again," she admitted softly. "They won't," the woman assured her. "And even if someone does, remember what you did yesterday. You kept going. You didn't let anyone take your music away." The girl took a deep breath, then another. Finally, she nodded. "I'll try," she whispered. "That's all you need to do," the woman smiled. "Just try." Before the woman left, she added gently, "Besides, you're not the same girl who walked." The hallway lights were dim when he finally stepped out of the practice room, leaving her behind the piano as she continued to let her fingers wander across the keys. The music followed him for a moment, fading little by little until it became nothing more than a distant echo. It stayed in his chest, though, warm and steady, like something he wasn't ready to let go of. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because his mind was full. There were too many thoughts to sort through at once. He made his way outside the building, letting the night air rush across his face. The sky was the same deep shade as earlier, but it felt different now, softer, calmer. Maybe it was because of the music, or maybe it was because of the quiet conversation they had shared. Either way, the night didn't seem as heavy as before. He stepped toward the wide steps in front of the door and sat down, resting his hands on the cold stone. For a while, he didn't move. He just breathed in the cool air and watched faint movements from the street below. A few cars passed by, their headlights gliding across the pavement. Someone walked their dog on the opposite side of the road. Life carried on with its own rhythm, separate from the strange and meaningful moment he had just lived. He let out a long sigh and lowered his head. His thoughts drifted again to her expression while playing, to the gentle smile she gave when she talked, to the way she sat at the piano like it was a part of her. He wasn't someone who got caught up in such moments easily, but this time he couldn't shake it. Before long, he heard light footsteps behind him. They stopped for a second, then continued toward him at an even pace. When he turned, he saw her standing there with her hands tucked into the sides of her jacket. Her face held a soft tiredness, but her eyes were bright. "You left so quietly," she said with a small smile. "I didn't want to disturb you," he replied. "You wouldn't have," she said as she stepped down to sit beside him. "I was just playing whatever came to mind." They sat together in silence for a few moments. Neither of them felt the need to fill the quiet. It was peaceful, almost comforting. After a while, she asked, "Do you ever feel like the world moves too fast, and we're just trying to catch up?" "All the time," he answered honestly. Today felt like that too. One moment everything is normal, and the next, everything changes. She nodded slowly. "When I played earlier, I didn't expect anything. I didn't expect people to listen. I didn't expect them to care." "They cared," he said softly. More than you think. She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a second. Why does that matter to you so much? He hesitated, trying to put his thoughts into simple words. Because I think you deserve to be seen. Not laughed at, not doubted. Seen for who you really are. Her eyes softened, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then she smiled gently. No one has ever said that to me before. Well, he said with a small shrug, someone had to. A faint laugh escaped her, light and genuine. She leaned back on her hands, letting her gaze wander across the quiet street. He watched her for a moment, not in a way that would make her uncomfortable, but simply trying to understand the kind of person she was. Can I ask you something? She said without turning. Of course. How did you feel when you heard me play the first time? He took a slow breath. Honestly? Frozen. I don't know if I've ever heard anything like that in person. It felt like something opened inside the room. She blinked lightly, absorbing his words. I was scared, you know. Not of the piano, just of everyone watching. I didn't want them to look at me like I didn't belong there. You do belong there, he said firmly. Your music proved that. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself, warming her hands inside her sleeves. The night wasn't too cold, but the small breeze made her draw a little closer to him. Not fully, but enough to feel some comfort. What about you? She asked. You looked nervous earlier too. Why? He looked away for a moment, focusing on a passing car. Maybe because I wasn't sure what to do. Maybe because I didn't expect anything like today. I usually just follow the rules, keep to myself, don't stand out. But when you played, it was like something in me shifted. She tilted her head. Shifted how? I don't know, he said with a small laugh. Maybe I realized the world is bigger than the space I live in. Maybe I realized I've been living too quietly. Her voice softened. There's nothing wrong with being quiet. No, he agreed. But I think I've been quiet for the wrong reasons. She watched him for a moment, then said, You're not as quiet as you think. You came to check on me. You stayed to listen. You said things that most people wouldn't say. That doesn't sound quiet to me. He felt a warmth rise in his chest at her words. Maybe today brought out a different side of me. She smiled again. But this time it carried something deeper. Appreciation. Trust. The night wind brushed against them again, carrying the scent of distant street food. Somewhere nearby, a door closed lightly. The world was still moving, but the moment between them felt still. Do you ever wonder what comes next? She asked suddenly. Every day, he said. I do too, she admitted. After what happened today, I don't know what will change. I don't know if I even want big things to happen. I just want to keep playing. I want people to listen for the right reasons. They will, he said. If you keep playing like that, they won't have a choice. She laughed lightly. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, he said. But it's possible. And you already took the hardest step. She pressed her lips together, thinking. You talk like you've known me for a long time. He smiled. Maybe I'm just paying attention. Her eyes met his. And for a moment, they stayed like that, two people sharing a quiet, understanding neither had expected to find Dot after a long pause. She said, Thank you. For everything today. You don't have to thank me, he replied. I do, she insisted softly. Because no one else would have listened the way you did. The street lamps flickered gently, casting a warm glow over the steps where they sat. The night didn't feel silent anymore. It felt full of something new, something steady and calm. She shifted slightly, brushing her shoulder against his just barely. Will you be there tomorrow? He nodded without hesitation. Of course I will. A gentle smile lifted her face, and she whispered, Good. I'm glad. The moment settled between them naturally, warm and unforced. And as they sat there together, under the quiet night sky, neither of them felt alone anymore. The hall was still buzzing from the incident, but she didn't seem to notice any of it as she walked slowly toward the backstage area. Her hands were shaking a little, though she tried her best to hide it. He noticed anyway. From where he stood near the side wall, he watched her move as if the world had suddenly become heavier around her. People were whispering, watching her with new eyes, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. But she kept her gaze low, not wanting to meet anyone's stare. He hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. He didn't want to scare her or make her uncomfortable, but he also knew she shouldn't be walking alone while feeling like that. So he called out softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Wait." She froze. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. Her face looked calm on the surface, but her eyes carried a quiet storm of emotions: fear, confusion, disbelief, and something else he couldn't name yet. He approached her gently, making sure his steps were soft. "Are you okay?" he asked. She blinked once, then twice, as if trying to gather her thoughts. I don't know," she said in a small voice. "I didn't think things would turn out like this." He nodded. "I know." She looked down at her hands. Everyone was staring. It didn't feel real. Like it wasn't even me playing. "It was you," he said firmly, but not harshly. "All of it was you." She swallowed, still visibly shaken. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to show that I wasn't lying. That's all." "You did more than that," he told her. "You stopped the whole room with one note." Her shoulders lifted slightly, almost as if she wanted to shrug, but didn't have the energy. She stepped closer to the wall and leaned against it. He stayed beside her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel pressured. People continued to walk past them, some throwing her curious glances, others whispering excitedly. A few even tried to approach, but he gently positioned himself so they wouldn't crowd her. He saw the way she flinched each time someone got too close. "Do you want to go somewhere quiet?" he asked Dot. She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Please." He led her down a side hallway where it was quieter. The walls were painted a dull cream color, and the lights flickered softly, casting a gentle glow on the floor. They found a small bench near the end of the corridor, tucked away from the main flow of people. She sat down slowly, her breath still unsteady. He stayed standing for a moment, unsure if she wanted space. But she looked up at him and gestured lightly. "You can sit," she said, barely above a whisper. He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough to show he wasn't leaving. They sat in silence for almost a minute, listening to the muffled noise of the hall. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't understand why he laughed at me," she said. "I didn't do anything wrong." He felt his jaw tighten slightly. "Some people think they can tell who has talent and who doesn't just by looking at them." "That's not fair," she whispered. "It's not," he agreed. "But today you proved him wrong." She bit her lip. "I wasn't trying to make a scene. I had to play. Something inside me wouldn't let me walk away." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what makes you special." She glanced at him, confused. "Special?" "You played because you had something to say," he said softly. "Not with words, but with music." And everyone heard it. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she tried to process that. "I didn't think anyone would listen." "They listened," he assured her. "They couldn't help it." For a long moment, she didn't move. Her fingers twisted gently around the edge of her sleeve. "Do you really think it was good?" she asked quietly, almost as if she was afraid of the answer. He turned to her fully. "I think it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard." Her eyes widened just a little, and her breath caught. She didn't smile, not fully, but something inside her seemed to soften. "Thank you," she murmured. "You were the only one who didn't laugh." "I never would have," he said simply. The silence that followed wasn't tense anymore. It was warm, gentle, something almost comforting. She loosened her grip on her sleeves and let her hands rest in her lap. "Do you think he's angry?" she asked after a moment. "The pianist?" He clarified. She nodded. He thought for a second. "I don't think angry is the right word. What is then?" she asked, surprised, shocked, maybe embarrassed. She looked down. "I didn't want to embarrass anyone." "I know," he said softly. "But you didn't do anything wrong. He challenged you because he thought you would fail. You didn't." Her brows drew together. "I just hope he doesn't hate me now." "He doesn't hate you," he said. "He can't, not after what you played." She let out a small breath, the tension easing slightly from her shoulders. He watched her face for a moment, how the light touched her features, how her eyes held a quiet depth he hadn't noticed before. She wasn't used to attention. That much was clear. She wasn't used to people believing in her either. And somehow, that made him even more certain that she deserved every bit of recognition coming her way. After a while, she stood up slowly. "I should go back," she said. "People are probably waiting." He stood with her. "Are you sure you're ready?" She nodded. "I think so. I just needed a moment." "Then I'll walk with you," he offered. She didn't argue. She seemed relieved. They walked back together, side by side, not touching, but not distant either. When they reached the edge of the main hall, the sounds grew louder again. Voices, footsteps, instruments being moved. She paused before stepping fully inside. "Do you think everything will be different now?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said finally, "but not in a bad way. And what if I'm not ready for different?" He looked at her gently. "Then take it one step at a time. I'll be here." She blinked slowly, taking in his words. Something in her settled, even if just a little. "Okay," she whispered. As they stepped back into the hall, people began to notice her again. The whispers started up, but this time they weren't mocking. They were curious, impressed, amazed. She straightened her posture, not out of pride, but out of quiet bravery. And just before the crowd fully surrounded her, she turned her head toward him and gave a small, grateful nod, one that told him his presence mattered more than he realized. He nodded back. Whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone.